because I think I've talked to more demoralized young people in the last 10 years than anybody on the planet. And I've watched and seen what works. And more demoralization is not the answer, you know. And there's something remarkable about well-socialized masculinity, you know. One of the things I learned, for example, when I was writing my last book, one of the things I analyzed was the symbolic use of the figure of the shepherd in the biblical corpus, right? Because the shepherd figures large both in the Old Testament and in the New. And the reason for that is because a shepherd is a very good symbol of well-socialized, ordinary masculinity. So shepherds in the ancient Middle East had to live by their own wits, right, in the wilderness. And so they were tough guys, and they had to keep the wolves and the lions at bay with pretty primitive weapons, as exemplified in the story of Moses and in the story of David, for example. But at the same time, they had to protect the most vulnerable, right? And lamb is a pretty good example of, you know, something vulnerable and edible, especially by monsters. And so the model for masculinity, the biblical model for masculinity, at least in part, is tough enough to keep the bloody wolves and the lions at bay, and what would you say, resourceful enough to survive on your own, and then devoted to caring for the most vulnerable. You know, and that's a pretty damn good model, and it's certainly exemplified, well, of course, by the figure of Christ in the New Testament, who's meta-shepherd, you might say, and capable of keeping the worst evils at bay while simultaneously serving the most alienated and vulnerable. And that's the right model for masculinity. And if you don't think that exists, well, you're definitely part of the problem and not part of the solution. And maybe you're a woman who's been damaged by men who've entered into your life who are radically immature or mad users of power, and that's really sad, and there's plenty of that too. But that doesn't mean that at its core there's something pathological about masculinity, and it certainly doesn't mean that the radical leftist proclivity to describe everything as an oppressive patriarchy and to make men weak is doing anything other than hurting young people right to the core. And Starmer's posturing with regards to adolescence is only going to make that worse. It's bad psychology, and it's not only that, it's also oriented not to help young people, but to make Mr. Starmer feel a hell of a lot more secure in the idiot presumptions of his dimwit progressivism. So, and that's really the fundamental aim. It's like, how can we show we're right? And if we have to burn some young people on the pyre to make sure that our moral presuppositions can remain intact and our faith in our idiocy remains unchallenged, then we might as well teach kids using a Netflix series on adolescence. Jesus, brutal, pathetic, to the core.
Jesus, pathetic, to the core. With those cutting words, Jordan Peterson didn't just criticize Keir Starmer, he eviscerated him. Starmer's astonishing support for introducing a fictional Netflix series called Adolescence into school curriculums, presumably as some sort of progressive educational tool. To Peterson, and many watching, this wasn't just a bad idea. It was a symbol of everything that's gone horribly wrong with modern left-wing leadership. And Peterson, as always, didn't hold back. Calling Starmer's position, as always, didn't hold back. Calling Starmer's position in dimwit progressivism wasn't just an insult. It captured the hollow, performative nature of Starmer's politics, where virtue, signaling, Trump substance, and identity theatrics are paraded around as policy. Peterson's rage was palpable, not just at the absurdity of trying to embed Netflix drama into classrooms, but at what it represents, a political class so disconnected from reality that they genuinely think children need more ideological programming rather than critical thinking, discipline, and genuine learning. Let's be clear, adolescence isn't Shakespeare, nor is it Orwell or even halfway intelligent social commentary. It's a dramatized, fictionalized series packed with confused narratives about identity, sexuality, and social struggle, wrapped in the gloss of Netflix cinematics. That Starmer sees this as curriculum material is not just a policy misstep. It's a window into his intellectual and moral emptiness. In Peterson's eyes, this is not leadership. It's surrender. Surrender to cultural decay. Surrender to progressive groupthink. Surrender to fashionable nihilism.
Well, I'll go back to where you started, really. The world has changed, and we can see that all around us. And what the UK is able to offer is political, financial, economic stability in a world that is very volatile at the moment. I think that is a huge plus for the UK, and we are open as a country for business, trade and investment. And we've taken on board, as a new government, less than a year in, the feedback from businesses, both domestic and international investors, about the things that hold back investment or delay investment on regulation. And actually, I flew out yesterday, and I flew from Heathrow, where many of you would have flown into and out of before. This government in January announced that we're backing a third runway at Heathrow. Heathrow are going to come forward before the summer with proposals for that third runway, and we are determined within this Parliament, so within the 5-year term of this Parliament, to see that planning application granted and to see spades in the ground. So I think that's about the seriousness of the intent of this government. We're also working with business to join up two of the best universities in the world, Oxford and Cambridge, with a new corridor between those two great cities to enable them to expand and grow, particularly in areas of tech and life sciences, which are huge UK strengths, but again are held back by those small cities not being able to expand. So a train link between those cities, connecting the towns and cities in between, it is about trying to attract more investment into Britain in some of those fast-growing sectors that are highly competitive, but where the UK has huge strengths.
Incidentally, do you think what's going on here in the tension between the administration and the universities in the US?
That's the Chancellor Rachel Reeves there in Washington, D.C. at the International Monetary Fund, saying the world has changed, and that's on the day that official data shows the public...
Chancellor Rachel Reeves, in what can only be described as a masterclass in political cowardice, has once again demonstrated that when the going gets tough, she reaches for the same tired playbook. Blame someone else. This time, during the World Economy Summit in Washington, D.C., Reeves had the audacity to suggest that the UK's ballooning borrowing crisis is somehow the fault of Donald Trump's tariffs. Yes, according to Britain's top economic official, a man who hasn't held office in years and governs a different country is responsible for the gaping holes in the UK's public finances. You can't make this up. Standing on an international stage, Reeves declared with hollow conviction that the world has changed, as if that sweeping generalization absolves her and her government of responsibility. But what has really changed, Chancellor, besides your ability to own your mistakes? While the UK economy buckles under the weight of inflation, stagnating growth, and reckless spending, Reeves thinks the real villain is a former US president's trade policy. It's almost comical, if it weren't so dangerously unserious. This isn't economic strategy. It's blame, shifting wrapped in platitudes. Reeves is attempting to outsource not just manufacturing, but accountability itself, instead of confronting the consequences of her own fiscal decisions. Ballooning debt, unfunded public sector promises, and a tax burden that's crushing small businesses. She's pointing fingers across the Atlantic. It's a level of deflection that would make even the most seasoned spin doctor blush.